presidential range of New Hampshire is home to some of the most unforgiving mountain terrain in the northeastern United States. Towering above treeline, these peaks are famous for their rapidly changing weather, hurricane-force winds, and conditions that can turn life-threatening in a matter of minutes. Even experienced hikers know these mountains demand respect. Among them stands Mount Adams, the second highest peak in New Hampshire. Its broad, exposed slopes offer little shelter once you're above treeline, leaving anyone caught in severe weather with few places to escape. On February 15th, 2015, those mountains became the setting for one of the White Mountains' most heartbreaking tragedies. Kate Matrosova was no stranger to difficult challenges. Driven, disciplined, and highly accomplished, she had climbed some of the world's highest peaks and had already completed 4 of the 7 summits. Everything about her life suggested someone who persevered through adversity. But on this day, even someone with Kate's determination and experience would find herself facing circumstances that no amount of preparation could completely overcome. Yeah, so Appalachia, 6:30 a.m. and just steps into the woods and the first thing you see. And it is like bustling with activity in the parking lot this morning. Almost didn't even get a spot, and there were already cars that were parked out on the road, probably from yesterday. That was a really busy Saturday, I'm sure. But anyway, it's Sunday, June 28th, and yeah, much different start than Kate had in February 2015, I'll tell you that. Kate Matrosova's story can seem pretty straightforward at first. She encountered extreme weather, became exhausted, and ultimately didn't survive. The more I looked into the details, read first-hand accounts from the rescuers, and pieced together the timeline of that day, the more questions I found myself asking. It's tempting to search for one decision that sealed Kate's fate, but I don't think that's how these incidents usually happen. More often, they're the result of a series of decisions, conditions, and circumstances that build on one another. That's one of the reasons I wanted to make this documentary. As I worked through the evidence, I kept coming back to 3 broad categories of risk: human factors, physical factors, and environmental factors. None of them exist in isolation. They interact, and sometimes they compound each other. For Kate, that raises several questions. Was fatigue beginning to affect her decision-making? Was dehydration playing a role? Did she feel committed to completing the traverse after traveling to New Hampshire for the second time in just a month? Could that have created added pressure to finish what she had set out to do? Another detail that stands out is the weather forecast. Kate never saw the updated forecast issued that morning, which strongly advised hikers to stay below treeline. Had she seen it, would she have changed her plans? We can't know, but it's an important piece of the story. Before we can understand decisions Kate made that day, I think it's important to understand who she was. Kate was born in Omsk, Siberia, and grew up in a modest family. Her father served in the Soviet military and was recognized for his work following the Chernobyl disaster. From a young age, Kate developed a reputation of being incredibly driven. She worked hard to build a successful career after moving to the United States, and she approached mountaineering with that same determination. By the time she attempted the Northern Presidential Traverse, she had climbed numerous major peaks around the world. Much of that experience, however, came through guided expeditions or climbing with groups. Solo winter travel in an alpine environment required a different kind of decision-making. One story from Ty Gagne's book has always stuck with me because I think it says a lot about Kate's personality. During her martial arts training, she often chose to spar with larger opponents. Rather than tap out during a chokehold, she would continue until she lost consciousness. Whether you admire that determination or question it, it reveals something important about her character. Once Kate committed to something, she was incredibly reluctant to give up. So imagine putting a boulder in the middle of a fast flowing river. The water has to squeeze around it and over it, and that creates turbulence and faster currents. So Mount Washington does something similar to the atmosphere. Winds that are already screaming overhead are forced over the summit, often becoming stronger, and the same goes for Mount Adams right over there and Mount Madison right here, which I'm very close to the top. Charles Ferruti, Kate's husband, dropped Kate off at the Appalachia Trailhead at 5 a.m., about 30 minutes later than originally planned. In nearby Berlin, New Hampshire, the temperature was just under 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Compared to what had been forecast, the morning may have seemed more manageable than expected. Kate planned to complete a northern presidential traverse, climbing Mount Madison, Mount Adams, Mount Jefferson, Mount Clay, and Mount Washington before descending the Ammonoosuc Ravine Trail, where Charlie planned to pick her up later that day. This wasn't an unusually ambitious itinerary. Many experienced hikers and mountaineers complete this traverse during the winter. What made February 15th, 2015 different was the weather. Records from the Mount Washington Observatory show temperatures dropped as low as 35 degrees below zero, while wind gusts reached 105 miles per hour. Those are conditions capable of overwhelming even experienced mountaineers. Based on the forecast she likely had available before leaving for the trailhead, the worst weather was expected to arrive later in the day. If that's the information she was relying on, the timing of her planned traverse would have appeared much more reasonable. But before Kate even reached Mount Madison, the day had already begun unfolding differently than expected. At about 5:30 a.m., 30 minutes after Kate had started her hike, Ryan Knapp publishes one of the strongest weather advisories of his career, urging hikers to remain below treeline. He also warns that anyone requiring rescue may not receive immediate assistance and would place rescuers at risk. Kate had already started hiking and likely never saw the updated forecast. By 8:30 a.m., Kate is nearing the Valley Way tent site and is maintaining a steady pace. At 8:50 a.m., Kate breaks treeline and turns on her GPS. The transition from treeline to alpine is rather abrupt here. Within minutes, you leave the protection of the trees and you're completely exposed to the wind. At 8:55 a.m., Kate arrives at Madison Spring Hut, where she pauses for approximately 11 minutes. What she was doing during those 11 minutes is impossible to know. Was she eating, drinking water, adding a layer, adjusting gear? What we do know is that 11 minutes is a long time to remain stationary above treeline in sub-zero temperatures and strong winds. During a stop like that, the body generates far less heat than it does while moving, and it's possible that the effects of cold stress were already beginning. At approximately 9:09 a.m., Kate begins ascending Mount Madison. Around 9:37 a.m., she turns off her GPS approximately 254 vertical feet below the summit. Because the GPS recording ends here, it's unknown whether she continued to the summit before returning to Madison Call. At 10:23 a.m., Kate turns her GPS back on in Madison Call. Up to this point, her pace and progress are generally in line with expectations. What she couldn't have known was that the weather was continuing to deteriorate sooner than expected. As the wind strengthened and temperatures dropped, the margin for error on the mountain became smaller with every passing hour. At approximately 10:36 a.m., Kate left Madison Call and began climbing toward Mount Adams via the Star Lake Trail. The winds were stronger, the temperature was falling, and she had already spent several hours exposed above treeline. Those changing conditions raise another important question. If the effects of cold stress were beginning to develop, could they have started to influence the way she perceived the conditions around her? Shortly after, she briefly drifted toward the parapet trail before recognizing the mistake and correcting her route. By itself, this wasn't a significant error. Hikers make small navigation mistakes all the time, especially in difficult conditions. The important thing is that she quickly realized it and got herself back on course. Then something happened that we still can't fully explain. Between 10:36 a.m. and 10:44 a.m., Kate remained stationary for approximately 8 minutes. What happened during that stop remains one of the biggest unanswered questions of the day. Was she catching her breath, adding another layer, eating or drinking, or was she simply trying to decide how to continue? I'm just thinking about, I'm over here near Star Lake and I'm going up to Madison, going up to Adams, and just thinking to myself about the timeline from when Kate left Madison Hut and started up Adams, and just thinking about the timeline and how incredibly slow things got for her. And you just got to imagine what those conditions must have been like for her to take that much time to travel the distances that she did. At approximately 11:21 a.m., Kate left the Star Lake Trail and began climbing more directly toward Mount Adams. Whether she realized she had left the marked trail is impossible to know. The official trail continues south before turning sharply toward the summit. It's possible the summit appeared easier to reach by climbing directly toward it. It's also possible the trail itself wasn't obvious. In winter, cairns can become buried in snow or coated in thick rime ice, making route finding much more difficult than it is in the summer. Either way, Kate continued climbing. At approximately 12:47 p.m., Kate reached an elevation of about 5,600 feet, roughly 144 vertical feet below the summit of Adams. According to Ty Gagne's reconstruction, this is where she encountered what he described as an impenetrable wall of wind. Okay, so it was about in this area that Kate actually left the Starlink Trail on her way up Adams. The trail continues this way over here, and it kind of wraps around and goes up to the summit. And on her track, she tried to cut straight up, and this part right up here is much steeper than the route the trail takes. It kind of skirts around that. Of course, it's difficult to imagine it right now in the summertime, because in the wintertime this is all buried in snow, and this is actually a pretty good snow field in the wintertime. So, and it's also hard to really imagine her path when you're looking at this in the summertime, for the same reason that everything fills in with snow and the landscape just looks completely different. Places that look absolutely impossible to travel on during the summer are possible, maybe not easy, but possible in the wintertime. At that point, Kate abandoned her summit attempt and turned around. I think this is one of the most significant moments of the entire day. Until now, Kate had been working toward completing the Northern Presidential Traverse. By turning around, she appears to have accepted that continuing toward the summit was no longer an option. Her objective had changed. No longer was the goal to complete the traverse. Now it was simply to get back down the mountain. Looking back at the timeline as a whole, a pattern begins to emerge. Kate started 30 minutes later than planned. She never received the updated weather forecast. She had already spent several hours exposed above treeline. The weather continued to deteriorate throughout the day. Each of those factors gradually reduced her margin for error. None of them, by themselves, guaranteed a tragic outcome, but together they left Kate with fewer options than she had earlier that morning. Unfortunately, the descent would prove just as demanding as the climb. Alright, pretty close to the summit of Adams, and I'm looking down where I came from, which was right down here. And looking down from here, I just gotta say that there are a lot of huge boulders, and it is steep. I mean, at least 45 degrees, I would think.
Although we can't know the exact moment Kate's day changed from a winter hike into a struggle for survival, it likely happened sometime after she turned back below the summit of Mount Adams. The time is 1:20 p.m., just 33 minutes after Kate abandoned her summit attempt. Under normal winter conditions, descending is often faster than climbing, but for Kate, it had taken 33 minutes to descend only 159 vertical feet. Around the same time, Mount Washington recorded a wind gust of 105 miles per hour. By 1:49 p.m., the observatory recorded an air temperature of 17 degrees below zero, with a wind chill of 64 degrees below zero. At one point, Kate wandered more than 200 feet east of the route she had taken on the ascent. Her GPS track showed her making a sharp turn back toward the Star Lake Trail, suggesting she realized she had drifted off course. Although she never made it back to the trail, she came within just 6 feet of her original track at approximately 1:54 p.m. Then, at around 2 p.m., Kate made another sharp turn east, moving farther away from the trail and in increasingly difficult terrain. Around this same time, she became separated from her backpack. It was later found uphill from her final location, indicating it had been left behind sometime during her struggle. The area Kate entered is what mountaineers often refer to as a terrain trap, a maze of dense crumbles and large boulders concealed beneath deep snow. Every step would have become increasingly difficult, especially if she experienced post-holing through the deep snow while fighting the relentless wind. By this point, her goggles were likely fogged or coated with ice, making them difficult to see through. We also know from the selfie she took earlier that day that her neck gaiter had already frozen solid. By this point, the complications that had been building throughout the day were now working together. The human factors included dehydration, limited food intake, exhaustion, and the cognitive effects associated with prolonged cold exposure and hypothermia. The environmental factors included hurricane force winds, deep snow, poor visibility, and extreme cold. The physical factors included dense crumbles, hidden boulders, and steep snow covered terrain that she was now attempting to climb through. None of these factors existed in isolation anymore. Together, they made every step more physically demanding and every decision more difficult. As Kate struggled to work her way back toward Madison Call, she was likely experiencing winds that were even more severe than those she encountered on the open slopes of Mount Adams due to the way the terrain funneled the wind through that area. By this point, it appears Kate had reached the stage where she could no longer get herself off the mountain. At 2:17 p.m., Mount Washington continued to record temperatures of 17 degrees below zero, while wind gusts remained near 96 miles per hour. Over the next hour, Kate made very little progress. By 3:15 p.m., Kate had advanced only 334 feet during the previous 1 hour and 23 minutes. Since turning around below the summit, it had taken her 2 hours and 28 minutes to descend only 775 vertical feet. This is where her movement stopped. 6 minutes later, at 3:21 p.m., Kate activated her personal locator beacon, beginning the rescue effort. As Kate's emergency beacon signal was received and processed, New Hampshire Fish and Game established a command post at Appalachia Trailhead. Throughout the evening, multiple beacon updates were received, but they remained imprecise, making it difficult for rescuers to determine Kate's exact location. Attempts to use aircraft were unsuccessful due to extreme weather. By the following morning, updated beacon signals allowed search efforts to focus on Star Lake Trail. Around midday, members of Androscoggin Valley Search and Rescue located Kate approximately 150 feet east of the trail. The medical examiner later determined that she died from cold injuries resulting in hypothermia. While researching this documentary, I had the opportunity to speak with Anthony Cormier of Androscoggin Valley Search and Rescue, who responded that day. He told me that getting Kate back to Madison Spring Hut was incredibly difficult, but what stayed with him the most wasn't the physical challenge, it was the emotional one. This was Anthony's first recovery, and he told me the experience stayed with him for a very long time. He also said it changed the way he approached the mountains.
Okay, so after Kate turned around somewhere up here, just short of the summit, I think it was, if I recall, it was like 140 some odd feet, vertical feet from the summit. She came back down, needing to turn around and go back, finally calling it quits. So she came back down and actually ended up crossing over the trail she took up, and she, apparently wandered down into this area before gradually making her way back and closer to the Star Lake Trail and the route she actually walked up.
One time, while climbing in the Pacific Northwest with experienced mountaineer Matty Bowman, the two encountered deteriorating weather. After traveling all that way, Anthony admitted he wanted to keep pushing toward the summit. Instead, they turned around. Anthony told me that Matty said something he has never forgotten. Turning back is just an invitation to come back another day. To me, that's one of the most important lessons in mountaineering. During my research, I also asked Ty Gagne what lesson he hopes hikers take away from Kate's story. His answer was simple. The White Mountains are an incredibly beautiful, unpredictable, and unforgiving environment. All of those things can be true at the same time. I couldn't think of a better way to end Kate's story.